If you look at the old photos of North Tonawanda from the late 60s, everything looks so peaceful. It looks like a classic post-war American dream. Families picnicking, kids running near the water, boats launching into the Niagara River. But I live right down the street from Gratwick Park in 1967. My memories don't look like those postcards. And I remember the dead fish floating, all of them belly up, down the current because the leaking toxins were stripping the oxygen straight out of the water corridor. The city's fix? They just leveled the trash with a bulldozer, tossed down a thin layer of dirt and grass seed, and called it a public park. From Gratwick, follow the water down to 30th and Falls Street, Niagara Falls. To us, it was just our teenage neighborhood. We walked these streets and we played in these yards. We had no idea that right beneath our feet, carved straight into the solid Lockport Dolomite bedrock, sat a massive unlined rock sewer called the Falls Street Tunnel. It acted like a giant underground toxic sponge. The tunnel cut directly through the groundwater paths of the Olin Chemical and DuPont plants. Decades of heavy industry chemical plumes soaked into the earth, pooled into the bedrock cracks, and bled right through the bare stone walls of the sewer. Whenever a severe rainstorm hit, the old combined pipe system would completely choke. The pressure would put foul, chemical saturated sludge right back up, forcing it to bubble out of our neighborhood streets. In January 1984, the hidden underworld beneath our neighborhood collided with a federal judge. New York State prosecutors stood up and laid out the raw laboratory sheets. They didn't call it a simple city storm drain anymore. The state officially declared the Falls Street Tunnel the single largest point source of toxic pollution in the United States. The prosecutors read off the ledger of what we had been living above. They found massive concentrations of PCBs and dioxins, legacy carcinogens that permanently bioaccumulate in your human tissue. They mapped volatile organic solvents, benzene, toluene, and chlorobenzene used in heavy plastics manufacturing alongside heavy deposits of raw mercury were shooting out of that cliff face directly into the lower river gorge every single day. But the chemicals in the water were only half the story. To understand how a city's foundation can turn against it, you have to look at the furnace floor. During World War II, the factories along the Niagara waterfront were melting down high-grade uranium ore for the Manhattan Project. They cooked the rocks at thousands of degrees. The pure, heavy metal sank to the bottom to build atomic bombs. The leftover scum, it floated at the top. When the molten waste cooled, it hardened into dense, dark, glass-like stone. It looked exactly like ordinary gray road gravel. They called it electrometallurgic slag. It was cheap, it was durable, and the chemical plants practically gave it away to anyone who wanted it free fill. But it wasn't just rocks. The smelting process couldn't strip the radioactive core. It left the slag heavily concentrated with thorium 230, thorium 232, and uranium 238, fused alongside toxic heavy metals like arsenic, lead, and chromium. The danger of this stuff isn't an immediate chemical burn. It plays a long, invisible game. It attacks the body in two distinctive ways, according to the EPA.gov. First, it sits beneath your driveway of your basement or your concrete, silently throwing off invisible waves of gamma radiation. Those rays shoot straight through the floorboards, cutting through human tissue and snapping fragile structural bonds of your DNA, triggering mutations that lead directly to bone cancer and leukemia. Quote from EPA.gov. But the second way is even worse. When the homeowner mows the lawn or the kids dig up dirt, the old slag crumbles into a fine, microscopic dust. You breathe it in, according to the EPA.gov. Inside your lungs, the thorium decays, releasing radon gas and throwing off alpha particles. Outside the skin, an alpha particle is harmless. Inside the lungs, it's a point blank bombardment of delicate tissues, causing permanent organ damage and rapid tumor growth, according to the EPA.gov. But how do you fight a ghost in a courtroom? When the local landowners and families finally banded together to sue the chemical giants, they ran straight into a wall of corporate lawyers. In 2021, the chemical companies walked into a federal court and weaponized a technicality. They argued that because this radioactive slag was given away or sold as cheap driveway subbase for decades, it wasn't quote unquote discarded hazardous waste. It was just quote unquote recycled industrial byproduct. And the lower court bought it. The judge threw the homeowner's case out, but the logic and justice held their ground, and in 2023 of July, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit shattered that corporate shield. They reversed the dismissal, ruling that the citizens do have a right to hold Union Carbide, Occidental Chemical, and Bayer accountable. The docket was wide open again. If you want to know where the poison went, you have to follow the trucks. Because this radioactive slag was treated like cheap travel, it didn't stay behind the factory fences. Today it sits hidden in plain sight across Niagara and Erie counties. The epicenter of the modern crisis is right here in the town of Niagara, along Fox Avenue and Chester Road. There, the EPA is actively digging out front lawns because the dirt is radiating thorium, according to the EPA.gov. But that's just one pocket. Look at the old industrial belt, Lockport Road, Buffalo Avenue, Royal Avenue. Look at the commercial strips along Niagara Falls Boulevard, where slag was poured to level out parking lots for bowling alleys and supply stores before blacktop went down. It even crawled up to Upper Mountain Road in Lewiston and out to the old Simmons Steel footprint in Lockport. For decades, our municipal highway departments blended this radioactive byproduct right into the subbase of our roads, according to WIVB. Over 1,000 miles of Western New York pavement, silently pulsing with the wartime footprint, according to WIVB. It's easy to look at a map and see the separate crimes. You look at Bratwood Park in North Tonawanda, and then you look 6 miles down the current to the Falls Street Tunnel in Niagara Falls, and it may seem like isolated incidents, but the river remembers. In the 1960s, Gratwood Park was an open wound, bleeding 25 tons of hooker, durez, phenolic resins directly into the shoreline mud. Because Gratwick sits upstream, those chemical resins didn't stay put. High river tides and rainwater constantly washed them straight out into the flowing water column. Those toxins floated down the river, passing right by our municipal water intakes. And where did they go? They ran straight down to Niagara Falls Industrial Belt, meeting the massive, unlined stone rock matrix of the Fall Street Tunnel. While Gratwick was poisoning the river above, the Fall Street Tunnel was draining the industrial landfills from below, acting as a giant underground sponge that sucked up toxic plumes from Olin Chemical and DuPont, venting millions of gallons of chemical sludge out into the gorge cliffs. They weren't separate problems, they were twin endpoints of a single corporate footprint. Today, if you walk along the river in North Tonawanda, you see a beautiful open green space. You see rolling hills of grass, walking paths, and people fishing. But this isn't natural geology. This is an engineered illusion. This massive tier earthwork that is Gratwick Park Cap. Beneath these manicured lawns lies a heavy plastic geomembrane liner, sealed under 24 inches of clean imported soil and armored along the shoreline by tons of heavy gray rip-rap stone. It was built in the late 90s to act as a permanent lid to the toxic coffin, trapping 25,000 tons of hooker durez, phenolic resins, and industrial slag where they dumped them decades ago. The signs along the path tell you it's a remediation area, a manicured green space. It's a daily reminder of the massive scale it takes to hide our history right in our plain sight. But an illusion has an expiration date. When you ask the engineers how long the landfill cap will realistically protect the public, they don't say forever. Environmental Protection Design Matrix estimate the heavy composite, geomembrane, and clay containment systems have a baseline lifespan of 50 to 100 years. The high-density polyethylene liner buried under the grass of Gratwick Park is tough, but it faces an unending battle against natural physics. Each freeze and thaw cycle of a harsh western New York winter, every shift in the deep earth water tables, and every aggressive tree root digging downwards works towards creating microscopic tears in the polyethylene liner. The EPA's mandatory post-closure care laws only legally require active state monitoring and water pumping for a minimum of 30 years. Since Gratwick's containment grid was fully completed in 2001, we are already halfway through the initial regulatory guarantee. If the state pulls the plug on the pumps, or if the buried clay wall cracks as the earth moves, those thousands of tons of hooker durez phenols will instantly find their way back out into the open river current. The cap bought us time, but it did not eliminate the threat. It just passed the bill down to our children. To truly see the scale of this puzzle, you have to look down from above. Look at how Western New York is physically wired by nature. The entire system is driven by a massive northward rush of water. It begins at the mouth of Lake Erie, where millions of gallons of water push out, forming the Niagara River. As the current surges north, it hits Grand Island and splits into two distinct marine highways, the West Channel lining the Canadian border and the East Channel hugging the American shore. Follow that East Channel, it sweeps directly past the industrial docks of Tonawanda and the long, rolling embankments of Gratwick Park. Every ounce of chemical leachate that escapes from the old hooker durez battles didn't just vanish. It was swept instantly into this rapid northward down current. The river channel merged back together right at the foot of Buckhorn Island, tightening into a single high-velocity flume. This massive column of water barrels straight into the Niagara Industrial Belt, rushing right over the intakes of the city water plant and past the hidden bedrock fractures of the Fall Street Tunnel before taking its final violent plunge over the edge of the American and Horseshoe Falls. It is one-way conveyor belt of physics. Whatever we dump into the water at the top of the county is guaranteed to hit the bottom. Before the laws changed, our mistakes didn't just stay in the backyard. They collected at the bottom of the map. By the mid-1970s, the world was forced to see what happens when an ecosystem is used as a corporate sewer. This was Lake Erie. It wasn't an open, blue, freshwater sea anymore. It was an ecological apocalypse. Millions of pounds of industrial phosphates and fertilizers fed massive, suffocating blankets of green, toxic algae bloom goop, swirling, iridescent blankets of heavy industrial oil slick the surface, choking out the light. Along the muddy sand, corroded 55-gallon chemical drums sat breached and leaking, resting alongside millions of dead, floating fish belly up in the stagnant surf. The warning signs on the beach didn't just tell you not to swim. They told you that the Great Lakes was officially dying. It was this exact, horrific imagery captured on televisions across the nation and that finally ignited the modern environmental movement and forced the passage of the Clean Water Act. When the national dust started running the Lake Erie is dead headlines, it felt like an emotional sledgehammer hit the entire Great Lakes basin. People who had lived their whole lives taking the water for granted were suddenly looking at green mats of decomposing algae and mountains of rotten fish. You have to understand, this wasn't an abstract scientific debate anymore. It was an immediate, terrifying reality. Parents looked at the oily film on the shorelines, looked at the rusty, weeping chemicals into the surf, and realized that they had been letting their children swim in an industrial sewer. The Dead Sea headline transformed a localized corporate dumping problem into a massive national crisis. For the first time, public anger boiled over. People flooded the town halls and marched on local capitals, demanding aggressive government intervention. If chemical giants and municipal landfills thought that they could keep hiding their waste under the surface of our waters forever, Lake Erie's collapse completely stripped away their cover. This isn't ancient history. The trucks are still idling at our curbs. The EPA removal team are still wearing Tyvek suits in residential driveways this very month. We are the ones left to solve a multi-million-dollar jigsaw puzzle designed by mid-century corporate giants. They left us with an impaired river, a hollowed-out network of toxic rock tunnels, and the soil that glows in the dark. But the paper trail is wide open now. Every FOIL request we file, every lab sheet we unredact, and every story we refuse to forget pushes the barrier wall back. We are digging their secrets out of the earth, and we are not stopping until the ground beneath our feet is finally safe for us to call home.